In the second half of the 19th century, one of the oldest of all European nations produced its greatest ever cultural achievements. For the people of Norway, the later 1800s represent a golden age of national creativity. In music, the works of Edvard Grieg captured the essence of the Norwegian spirit. In literature, the plays of Henrik Ibsen brought him fame far beyond his northern homeland. And the final years of the 19th century also saw the emergence of a remarkable Norwegian artist, Edvard Munch.
Strindberg said the human spirit had awoken from its solitude and found itself without power because it had lost touch with the transcendental. And I think it's this feeling of isolation and powerlessness that Munch portrays in his work. He does this by showing people in states of emotional tension and stress with great psychological insight. His graphic works were equally powerful and served as an inspiration, in fact, for graphic artists for many years.
Edvard Munch is seen really as an inheritor of Van Gogh's concern with the human condition, human emotion. His work has become symbolic of the human condition as Munch's work, be it The Scream or The Sick Child. And he was able to free artists to be able to actually work along that line. In other words, not to suppress that emotion, both conscious and unconscious. And the background of Scandinavia and the Northern European, of those mythical tales of horror and of drama, is brought into the mainstream of European art.
In 1893, it was Edvard Munch who created one of the defining images of the modern age. At the start of the 21st century, this single painting remains as contemporary and as relevant as it has ever been. This is a perplexing, enigmatic work, an expression of the darker side of the human condition by an artist whose own life was deeply troubled. Munch grew up surrounded by sickness, madness, and death. All his life, he had difficulties with relationships, especially with women. By middle age, he had become an alcoholic, a condition which led to a nervous breakdown. But by this time, Edvard Munch had triumphed over his traumatic life with the genius of his art. Edvard Munch was born on the 12th of December 1863 in the Norwegian town of Løten. He was the second of 5 children born to middle-class parents who moved to the Norwegian capital when he was just 1 year old. What is now the city of Oslo was then known as Christiania, and it was here that Munch's lifetime of troubles began. When Munch was 5, his beloved mother, Laura, died of tuberculosis, followed 9 years later by his favorite sister, Sophie. Later, both his father, Christian, and another sister became mentally disturbed. It's said that Christian Munch took to praying obsessively, often for days on end, and his son, Edvard, later recalled a childhood of misery and darkness.
When he was 22 and painted the picture of his sister dying with his mother in attendance, he was obviously still working through feelings of loss for his mother and for the later death of his sister. I think his early childhood affected his paintings until after his nervous breakdown in 1908. In fact, he refused to have treatment for his depression or his addiction to drink before that time because he felt that he would lose the impetus and intensity which was informing his painting. In other words, he wanted to work out his neuroses himself through paint.
At this time, the influence of childhood experience on adult life was not fully understood. The works of Sigmund Freud were yet to be written. But there can be no doubt that Edvard Munch's miserable childhood had a lasting impact upon him. As an adult, he described how illness, madness and death were the black angels that kept watch over his cradle and stayed with him throughout his life. This is reflected in much of Munch's greatest works.
One can very often simply think of Munch in terms of psychological being and the problems he had as a child. And it is a fact, I think, that when you have been through traumatic experience as a child, that never leaves you. And I think this is certainly the case with Munch. I don't think that the traumas of his early life, I think they're always there, and they fed and were the source material for many of his very powerful paintings.
Munch's childhood could be described as tragic, and its effects never fully left him as an adult. But his early years did have occasional consolation. Following his mother's death, he was looked after by an aunt, Karen Jolstadt, a woman with a hobby that was to play a significant part in Munch's life. Jolstadt was an amateur painter, and under her guidance, her nephew developed a talent for drawing. By the time Edvard Munch neared adulthood, he had also taken up painting, and his life's passion was beginning to reveal itself. By the age of 17, after a brief spell spent training as an engineer, Munch enrolled at the Norwegian State School of Arts and Crafts. His tutor, Julius Middleton, was a sculptor whose work followed formal and academic conventions. The young Munch soon found himself seeking out more radical influences and became involved with a group of young artists led by the naturalist painter Christian Krogh. Along with another Munch acquaintance, landscape painter Fritz Thaulau, Krogh organized alternative exhibitions of contemporary art. It was at one of these events that Munch showed this early canvas, Morning, a naturalistic, sympathetic image influenced by the work of his one-time master, Krogh. The initial critical reaction to this painting is not known, but it's likely to have been unfavorable. Munch's early works were heavily criticized, especially when he became involved with an even more radical group of creative minds, the so-called Christiania Bohemia. This was an avant-garde movement of intellectuals and artists led by Hans Jager, an anarchist thinker who later sat for this powerfully constructed Munch portrait. This was not the last time that Munch found himself associating with free-thinking intellectuals, but by 1885, the 21-year-old painter was keen to expand his horizons. When his friend, Fritz Thaulau, gave him the chance to travel to the very center of European artistic life, he jumped at the opportunity. In the autumn of 1885, Edvard Munch arrived in Paris. It would not be a long visit. Just 3 weeks after his arrival in the French capital, Munch returned to Norway. But his first exposure to life in Paris gave him a lasting taste for the city. It also gave him a chance to experience the most exciting contemporary development in the world of art, the Impressionists.
Here was colour, here was form, all of them, if you like, shattered, but great excitement, great life. There's a sense of happiness, and that must have been something which he probably felt uncomfortable with. A lack of seriousness, perhaps, is a better way of putting it. But it must have been an impact. I mean, there's no doubt about it.